Sometimes, a single cry can change your whole life. That night, the mansion was wrapped in golden silence until the sound of a baby's cry tore through the air, like the voice of a soul, demanding to be heard. It wasn't just any cry. It was desperate, pure, and aching, the kind that crawls beneath your skin and grips your heart until it hurts. Downstairs, where moonlight touched the marble floor, a young woman froze mid-motion. Her hand stopped scrubbing. Her breath caught. Her name was Isabella Torres, and in that moment, she wasn't just a maid. She was a mother who had once lost everything. The sound pierced through her chest like a memory she had tried to bury. 6 weeks had passed since her own baby's heart had stopped beating. Yet her body still remembered her milk still came. Her arms still ached for weight that was no longer there, and her nights were haunted by the silence that follows a cry that never comes again. Now, that silence was broken by another's. Somewhere above, a baby was crying so hard it seemed the world itself might shatter. Isabella's lips trembled. She whispered to herself, "Please, someone pick him up." But no one did. Upstairs, in the nursery drenched in pale blue light, little Ethan Carter lay in his crib, red-faced, hungry, and alone. The bottle beside him was cold, curdled with neglect. The nanny, who was supposed to care for him, had long since vanished into the city night, chasing laughter and perfume instead of duty. And in the grand office below, his father, Daniel Carter, the widowed millionaire, was buried in the blue glow of his computer screen, his face hollowed by sleepless nights and the ache of a love he could never bring back. He didn't hear the cry anymore. Not the way Isabella did. Because when grief runs deep, sometimes the world's suffering sounds like silence. But Isabella couldn't ignore it. With every wail, her chest tightened until tears blurred her vision. She pressed her hands against the soapy floor, whispering a prayer. "God, please, don't let this baby die." Her voice cracked, soft, trembling, full of healing sorrow. Then she stood. Her legs shook. Her heart knew what her mind feared. If she went upstairs, everything would change. Each step up the winding staircase felt like walking back into her own grief. The cry grew weaker, fainter, as though the little one was running out of strength to be heard. She burst into the room, and time seemed to stop. The crib stood beneath a flickering night lamp. The air smelled of spoiled milk and fear. And there he was, Ethan, his tiny fists trembling, his lips dry and quivering, his breaths shallow. He was fading. Her hands trembled as she scooped him up. He was so small, so fragile, the heat of fever burning through his skin. "You poor little angel," she whispered, tears spilling freely. Her heart beat wildly, memories crashing into her like a storm. Her own son, blue and still, the hospital's white walls closing in, the emptiness that had followed. No, not again, not this child. She searched frantically, bottle, formula, anything, but everything was spoiled or useless. Panic rose inside her, sharp and blinding. And then something ancient, something sacred, stirred within her the instinct that belongs only to mothers. She sat down, her breath shaking, eyes closed for a single heartbeat, and listened to the rhythm of the child's faint breathing. Then she acted, not with thought, but with love. The next sound was silence, sweet, fragile silence. Ethan had stopped crying. His tiny fingers curled into her blouse. His lips finally found warmth, nourishment, life. A peace unlike any she had known spread through her trembling body. She felt his heartbeat, fast and strong against her skin, and for the first time in 6 weeks, her soul wasn't hollow. Tears streamed down her cheeks, soft and slow, each one carrying a drop of pain washed into peace. "It's all right, little one," she whispered, voice trembling with tenderness. "You're safe now." The room filled with a sacred quiet, the kind only love can create. The moonlight turned golden, as if heaven itself paused to watch. Minutes passed like hours. Her heart began to heal in the rhythm of a baby's breathing. She remembered what warmth felt like, what purpose felt like. The weight of him in her arms was heavy, real, grounding, like the universe whispering that broken hearts can still be mended through kindness. Downstairs, Daniel finally ended his meeting. Numbers and voices faded from his ears, but one sound cut through the sudden absence of crying. For the first time that night, the house was calm. He frowned. Quiet could be beautiful, but in a home that had known only silence since his wife's death, this calm felt almost frightening. He stood up. When he opened the nursery door, the air shifted. His breath caught as his eyes fell on the sight before him. Isabella, seated by the window, blouse half open, the faint golden light haloing her figure. Ethan in her arms, sleeping, peaceful, safe. It was a picture no man could ever forget, pure, unguarded love. For a heartbeat, Daniel felt something stir deep inside him. A memory of warmth, of family, of all he had lost. But his mind rebelled. His grief turned that beauty into confusion, then anger. "What are you doing?" His voice came out harsher than he intended. Isabella startled, clutching the baby protectively to her chest. Her eyes widened, full of fear. "Sir, I can explain. The baby, he was burning up, crying for hours. The milk was spoiled. I couldn't just stand there and watch him fade away." Her words tumbled out like tears. Daniel's chest tightened. His son, sleeping for the first time in days, looked peaceful. His little hands were no longer trembling, but all Daniel could see was the breach of boundaries, the ghost of his late wife, and the weight of judgment waiting at the door. He didn't answer. He couldn't. The image before him was too human, too intimate. It tore through the walls he had built since Claire's death. Something in his throat ached to say thank you, but pride sealed his lips. He turned away. Isabella lowered her gaze, her tears falling onto Ethan's tiny head. She whispered again, "You're safe, my little one." But her heart knew nothing would ever be the same. That night, when she finally laid the baby down and returned to her small room, the echoes of Daniel's silence followed her. She stared at her hands, still trembling from what they had done. Part of her felt shame for crossing an invisible line. Another part, stronger, felt peace. Healing peace. For the first time since her loss, she had saved a life. Maybe, she thought, that was reason enough to keep living. She didn't know that in the room above, Daniel stood by his son's crib, watching the rise and fall of his little chest. He wanted to deny what he'd seen, but every breath his child took whispered one truth. The woman he misunderstood had given him back his son's life. Outside, the storm finally passed. Rain slid down the mansion windows like tears heaven had been waiting to shed. Inside, two souls, one grieving, one healing, had collided through a single act of compassion, and, though neither of them could name it yet, something sacred had begun that night, something neither time nor pride could undo. Sometimes, love doesn't arrive dressed as romance. It comes disguised as mercy. It enters quietly, through cracked doors and broken hearts, and stays when no one else will. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that love often begins in the most unexpected places, take a moment, breathe, smile, and let your heart rest. Leave a thought below. Tell me if you've ever seen compassion change someone's life. And if you want more stories that heal, that remind you love still exists even in the darkest corners, remember to like, subscribe, and stay close. The next chapter will bring more light, more warmth, and perhaps a little more faith in what hearts can do when they choose to love again. The next morning, sunlight crept softly across the marble floor, painting gold over what had been a night of broken silence. The mansion looked peaceful again, but peace in that house was only surface deep. Inside its walls, sorrow lingered like perfume that refused to fade. Daniel Carter sat alone in his office, the air heavy with exhaustion. His suit was immaculate, his tie perfectly knotted, yet nothing about him felt whole. The glow from his laptop bathed his face in pale light, highlighting the dark circles beneath his eyes, shadows carved by too many sleepless nights. A photo frame stood beside him. Claire, his late wife, smiling with the kind of tenderness that once filled their world. She had been the gentleness to his fire, the music to his silence. When she died giving birth to Ethan, the world lost its color. Every decision he made after that became mechanical contracts, mergers, numbers, anything that kept him from feeling. But even numbers, cold and predictable, couldn't shield him from the echo of a baby's cry that still haunted the hallways. Ethan was only 2 months old, yet Daniel already felt like a stranger in his son's life. Each time he looked at the child, guilt whispered through his veins she had died bringing him into the world. Loving Ethan felt like betraying Claire's memory. And so he loved the boy from a distance, through quiet gestures, hiring the best nannies, the most expensive doctors, the safest crib, but never through touch, never through warmth. He didn't see the way Ethan's tiny fists reached for him when he passed by, or how the baby's face lit up when he heard his father's voice. Daniel was too busy fighting the ghosts inside his mind, too afraid to open the door to grief. In another corner of that vast house, Isabella moved through the morning light, her heart heavy but oddly calm. She had expected to be dismissed for what happened the night before. Every moment she waited for Daniel to appear, to confront her, to tell her she had gone too far. But the hours passed in silence. The only sound was Ethan's gentle breathing upstairs. When she crept into the nursery to check on him, her heart softened. He was sleeping peacefully, his lips still curled into a faint smile, as if dreaming of the warmth he had found in her arms. Isabella's eyes filled with quiet tears. She reached out and brushed a lock of soft hair from his forehead. "You're strong, little one," she whispered, voice trembling like prayer. "Stronger than you know." She didn't hear the footsteps approaching behind her until they stopped at the door. Daniel stood there, his expression unreadable. The morning light caught the edges of his face, turning his sharp features softer than usual. For a long moment, he said nothing. He simply watched her, watched how gently she looked at his son, how her touch carried something rare, something he couldn't buy with all his wealth. Love that expected nothing in return. "I didn't get a chance to thank you," he finally said, his voice low, rough from lack of sleep. Isabella turned quickly, startled, unsure if he meant gratitude or reprimand. "You saved my son's life last night." His tone softened at the end, but his eyes carried confusion, gratitude entangled with shame. "It wasn't your fault," Isabella said quietly. "He just needed someone to care, someone to hold him." Her words fell into the air like soft feathers. Daniel wanted to believe them, but they cut deeper than she could know. Someone to care he had paid for care, demanded care, but never given it himself. The truth pressed hard against his chest. He nodded, unable to speak, and turned away before his emotions betrayed him. Isabella watched him go, sensing the storm he carried behind his calm. She knew grief when she saw it. It was a language she spoke fluently. There was something about Daniel's silence that reminded her of herself the way loss turned people into shadows. And though she had no right to feel anything for him, a small flicker of compassion rose quietly inside her, like a candle refusing to die. Days passed, and the rhythm of the mansion changed in ways neither of them expected. Ethan's laughter filled the halls more often. He began to recognize Isabella's voice, to reach for her with tiny hands that trembled with trust. Daniel noticed. At first, it unsettled him the way his son responded to a woman who was not his mother. But the more he watched, the more he understood. His baby's peace came from her presence. He began to linger longer in the doorway when Isabella sang lullabies in Spanish, her voice low and warm, carrying something healing. Sometimes he would close his eyes, letting the melody seep into the cracks of his tired soul. He didn't know why, but her voice calmed him too. One afternoon, after a long meeting filled with hollow words and fake smiles, Daniel returned home earlier than usual. He found Isabella sitting by the window with Ethan on her lap, sunlight spilling over both of them. She was telling the baby a story about her hometown by the sea, her tone soft and loving. The child cooed in response, as if understanding every word. Daniel stood silently for a while, unwilling to break the fragile beauty of the moment. When Isabella finally noticed him, she flushed, quickly standing. "I'm sorry, sir, I didn't hear you come in." He shook his head. "Don't apologize. It's nice. You have a way of making this house feel alive again." Isabella smiled faintly, unsure what to say. "Maybe it's just the baby. He brings light wherever he goes." Daniel looked at her, really looked this time. There was something in her eyes, kindness edged with sorrow, strength born from loss. "No," he said quietly. "It's you." For the first time in years, he meant it. From that day, a silent bond began to form between them, delicate as glass yet strong enough to hold their broken pieces together. Isabella continued her work with quiet grace, never overstepping, always respectful. But Daniel found himself drawn to her warmth like a man stepping into sunlight after a long winter. In the evenings, he would find excuses to linger near the nursery, pretending to check on Ethan, though what he really sought was her calm presence. She spoke little, but her silence spoke volumes. There was peace in her movements, patience in her gaze. It soothed the ache he carried, even if only for a moment. But the world outside their fragile haven had sharp eyes and sharper tongues. The wealthy neighbors, the staff who whispered behind closed doors, all began to notice the subtle changes, the way Mr. Carter seemed softer when the maid was near, the way the baby's laughter echoed louder these days. It didn't take long for curiosity to twist into gossip. Isabella felt it first. The cold stares, the hushed conversations that stopped when she entered a room. Still, she endured, telling herself it didn't matter as long as Ethan was happy. But deep down, fear stirred. She had seen how quickly the world could turn kindness into scandal. Daniel, too, sensed it, though he pretended not to care. Yet every rumor carried the same unspoken accusation. The widowed millionaire and the maid who dared to heal what he thought was unhealable. The pressure built slowly, quietly, like cracks spreading through a wall he had worked so hard to keep standing. And beneath it all, something unexpected bloomed. Each glance between them lingered a heartbeat too long. Each exchange of words carried warmth neither dared to name. When their hands brushed by accident, passing a blanket, a bottle, it was as though time stopped. They both felt it, that fragile thread of something deeper, something neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Isabella tried to remind herself that love had no place here. She was a maid. He was her employer. The world would never forgive what it could not understand. But late at night, when she closed her eyes, she remembered the look in his eyes, tired, broken, longing for a peace she once thought she'd lost forever. Daniel told himself it was gratitude, nothing more. That he admired her strength, her gentleness, yet when he saw her laughing softly with his son, when her smile caught the sunlight just so, something in his chest ached with a quiet yearning he hadn't felt since Claire's last breath. Neither of them spoke it aloud, but the silence between them began to hum, tender and dangerous, and somewhere deep inside, both knew, no matter how they tried to ignore it, the story that began with the baby's cry was far from over. Their hearts were no longer strangers. They were two wounded souls slowly remembering what warmth felt like. And as evening fell over the Carter mansion, the faint scent of lavender and baby powder lingered in the air, a small, healing promise of everything still to come. The afternoon sun fell in ribbons through the tall windows, catching the floating dust like golden snow. The mansion felt quiet again, but it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence that comes when something fragile begins to bloom, something too new and tender to name. Isabella moved carefully through the nursery, humming under her breath as Ethan played on a blanket by the window. His laughter was the kind that made the world pause, the kind that reached into tired hearts and reminded them why people kept going. Daniel stood by the doorway, his hands in his pockets, pretending to look at an email on his phone but not reading a single word. He was watching them. He didn't mean to, but his eyes kept finding their way to her. The way the sunlight touched her hair, the way her laughter wrapped around the baby like warmth itself, it stirred something in him, something that both comforted and frightened him. He didn't understand it at first. For so long, his world had been numbers and meetings and silence, and now, suddenly, There was this woman who carried both pain and peace in her voice, who had turned his home from a house of grief into a place that felt alive again. He caught himself smiling at the sound of Ethan's giggle and quickly looked away, as though afraid someone might see that his heart was still capable of soft things. "Mr. Carter?" Isabella's gentle voice broke the quiet. She was kneeling on the floor, holding Ethan up as he tried to stand on unsteady legs. "He's getting stronger every day," she said softly, pride glimmering in her eyes. "He looks for you sometimes, you know. When he hears footsteps, he turns his head hoping it's you." Daniel's breath caught. He stepped closer, kneeling beside her. The baby turned, eyes wide and bright, reaching a tiny hand toward his father. Daniel hesitated before letting the baby grip his finger. It was the smallest touch, but it felt like a miracle. Ethan laughed, a sound pure and whole, and something inside Daniel's chest loosened for the first time in years. "See?" Isabella whispered, smiling. "He knows you." Those words lingered long after she left the room that day. "He knows you." Daniel found himself repeating them quietly as he walked through the halls that night, passing framed memories of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. The mansion, once filled with ghosts, now held echoes of laughter. And though Daniel told himself it was all because of his son, deep down he knew it was also because of her. The next evening he found Isabella in the kitchen, humming a lullaby while washing bottles. The melody was old, something Spanish and sorrowful yet soothing. He didn't interrupt her. He just stood there, listening. When she finally noticed him, she startled, dropping the bottle into the sink. "Oh, Mr. Carter, I didn't hear you come in." "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to frighten you. I just—" He hesitated. "That song, it's beautiful." Her eyes softened. "It's one my mother used to sing. She said it keeps away bad dreams." Daniel's gaze lowered to the water swirling down the drain. Maybe we both could have used that. They stood in silence for a while, the air gentle between them. Then Isabella turned off the tap, drying her hands slowly. "Sir," she began, her voice quiet but steady, "I want you to know what happened that night. I never meant to disrespect you. I only wanted to help. The world may never understand it, but I don't regret it. Not for a second." Daniel looked up. Her eyes met his, clear and honest. Something inside him cracked something that had been sealed since Claire's death. "I know," he whispered, "and I'm the one who should be sorry. I was cruel that night. You saved my son, and all I could see was what people might say." "People always talk," Isabella said gently, "but love doesn't need permission to be kind." Her words stayed with him like a quiet hymn. That night, Daniel dreamed of Claire for the first time in months, but this time, she wasn't dying. She was smiling, holding their baby, and standing in sunlight. When he woke, he couldn't remember her voice, only the warmth in her eyes, the same warmth he'd seen in Isabella's. As days passed, the fragile bond between Daniel and Isabella deepened. It wasn't spoken or confessed, it simply existed, like the rhythm of breathing. He began to notice the smallest things about her, the way she brushed her hair behind her ear when she was nervous, how she bit her lip while concentrating, how her laughter always began softly before blooming into something that filled the room. Sometimes she caught him watching, and he would look away, pretending to focus on work. But she'd smile quietly to herself, as if she understood what he couldn't say. There was healing in their silence, a gentle peace that words might have ruined. But peace never lasts long in a world that feeds on judgment. The whispers began as faint ripples, maids murmuring in hallways, neighbors exchanging glances during afternoon visits. "Have you noticed how often he's home these days?" one asked. "And the way he looks at her?" Another replied. Within a week, it wasn't just whispers, it was gossip, spreading like fire through the wealthy district. Isabella felt it everywhere she went, the weight of eyes, the tone of accusation hiding in politeness. But she stayed quiet. She poured her love into Ethan, into small acts of care that no one could twist into something impure. Daniel noticed too. At first, he ignored it, believing it would pass. But soon the calls started, an old friend warning him about his reputation, a business partner hinting at uncomfortable rumors. Each word struck him harder than he expected. Yet, when he looked at Isabella, at the peace she brought into his son's life, he realized the world's judgment felt meaningless compared to the warmth she carried. One evening, he found her sitting in the garden after sunset, Ethan asleep in her arms. Fireflies danced in the grass, and the air was soft with the scent of jasmine. Daniel stood beside her quietly before speaking. "They're talking," he said. "About us." "I know," Isabella replied. "But truth has its own voice. Let them talk." He sat down beside her, his arm brushing hers accidentally. Neither moved away. "I'm afraid," he confessed. "Not of them, but of losing this, whatever this is." Isabella's eyes glistened in the faint light. "You can't lose what isn't yours to begin with. You can only lose what you never cherished." Her words disarmed him completely. He looked at her not as a maid, not as someone who worked under his roof, but as a woman whose soul had quietly rewritten the meaning of love. She wasn't there to replace his wife. She was there to remind him that love, in its truest form, never dies. It simply changes shape. The wind stirred, carrying the faint cry of the night bird. Daniel looked at Ethan, sleeping peacefully, then back at Isabella. "He's so calm with you," he said softly. "It's like he knows your heart." Isabella smiled, her voice a whisper. "Maybe he does. Babies always sense love before words can name it." They sat there until the stars blinked awake, two broken souls bathed in quiet healing. For the first time since Claire's death, Daniel didn't feel alone. He didn't feel empty. He felt human. But the world doesn't forgive tenderness easily. The next day, the rumors reached the one person Daniel feared most: Patricia, his late wife's closest friend, a woman with a voice sharp enough to cut glass. She called him, her tone dripping with concern and condescension. "Daniel, dear, people are talking. That maid, Isabella, don't you think you're getting too close? It looks improper. For you, for the company, for Ethan." Daniel clenched his jaw, holding back the anger rising in him. "Isabella has done nothing but care for my son with kindness." "Kindness," Patricia scoffed. "That's what they all call it before it turns into scandal. Be careful, darling. The world is watching." When the call ended, Daniel stood by the window, his reflection fractured by the glass. He felt trapped between the heart he was rediscovering and the reputation he had spent years protecting. Downstairs, he heard Isabella laughing softly with Ethan, the sound spilling into the quiet hallways like music. And he thought, let them talk. What they call scandal, I call grace. That night, when he passed her in the corridor, their eyes met. No words were spoken. They didn't need any. Her gaze said, "I understand." His said, "I'm not letting this break us." It was a fragile promise made in silence, but sometimes silence holds the strongest vows. As the days blended into weeks, the mansion itself began to change, less like a place of mourning, more like a home. Flowers bloomed again in the garden. The baby's laughter became a morning ritual. Even the walls, once cold, seemed to hum with warmth. Neither of them knew what the future held. But that night, as Isabella laid Ethan to sleep and Daniel lingered by the door, watching the gentle rhythm of her hands, one thing became clear. Healing had already begun, and love, quiet, forbidden, beautiful, was slowly learning how to breathe again inside two hearts that had forgotten how. The morning began with the kind of quiet that comes before storms. A soft wind moved through the curtains, brushing against the pale light that entered the Carter mansion. The house looked unchanged from the outside, still wrapped in wealth and stillness. Yet inside, something fragile trembled like a thread of peace on the verge of snapping. Isabella felt it as she dressed Ethan, her hands gentle but slower than usual. The whispers had reached her room now. The other staff spoke in half-sentences, their eyes avoiding hers, their kindness turning cautious. She told herself she didn't care, But when she caught her reflection in the mirror, a tired young woman, with eyes too soft for a world too cruel, her heart stung. She hadn't done anything wrong. She had loved, that was all. Loved a child who needed her. Loved a man who didn't ask for it but somehow needed it too. Love had never felt shameful before, but in that house of marble and gold, it suddenly did. Daniel noticed it as well. The tension had crept into the air like smoke. His phone buzzed, endlessly calls from friends, business partners, even relatives. Everyone had an opinion. Distance yourself from her, one advised. Think of your company, another warned, and beneath their words hid what they truly meant. A maid could never belong in a world like his. He tried to brush it off, to protect her quietly, yet every warning felt like a stone dropped on his conscience. He saw how the servants looked at her now, how even Melissa, the nanny who had once neglected his son, smirked behind her polite smiles, and Daniel, who had faced boardrooms full of ruthless men without blinking, suddenly found himself unable to face his own home without guilt. That evening, as the last rays of sunlight faded, he found Isabella sitting alone in the nursery, humming softly to Ethan. The baby slept peacefully, his little chest rising and falling like waves. Her voice was gentle, but her eyes were far away, heavy with something unspoken. Daniel stood in the doorway for a long time before stepping closer. "Isabella," he said quietly. She looked up, startled, then lowered her gaze. "Yes, sir?" "You don't have to call me that," he murmured. "Not when we're alone." Her lips parted, then pressed together again. The air between them felt fragile. "It's better this way," she said softly. "People already talk enough." Daniel exhaled slowly. "People will always talk. They don't understand what you've done for me, for Ethan." She shook her head gently. "I didn't do it for thanks." He studied her face, tired yet luminous, strong yet vulnerable. He wanted to say what had been building inside him for weeks, that she had healed something no one else could. But words like that carried weight, and the world would twist them into scandal. So he stayed silent, watching her in the dim glow of the night lamp. "I just don't want you to get hurt," he said finally. Her eyes met his, calm and sad. "I'm already hurt, Mr. Carter, but not because of them, because I know this can't last." Her voice trembled, though her face remained steady. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she belonged here, that he needed her more than his own breath. But before he could speak, a knock shattered the moment. Melissa entered, pretending surprise at finding them together. "Oh, I didn't realize," she began, feigning embarrassment, though her eyes glimmered with quiet triumph. "Dinner's ready, sir." Daniel nodded stiffly. Isabella excused herself, her steps light but hurried, the hem of her dress brushing against the floor like a sigh. He knew what Melissa's look meant. Within hours, her version of this moment would spread through every corridor, every kitchen, every whispering heart that craved a new rumor. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He stood at the window of his study, looking down at the garden bathed in silver moonlight. His mind spun with voices, judgment, advice, fear. But all he could see was Isabella's face, her quiet courage, her pain. The world outside his glass walls didn't care about truth. It cared only for stories that entertained. And he realized, with a hollow ache, that they were becoming one. The next morning, the storm broke. Patricia's voice came through the phone, sharp as ever. "Daniel, I warned you. Do you know what's being said now? They're calling her your mistress. The board is furious. This can't go on." He gripped the edge of his desk. "It's not what they think," he said through clenched teeth. "It never is," Patricia replied coldly. "But perception is everything. End it, Daniel, or you'll destroy more than your reputation." When the call ended, the silence in the office was deafening. Daniel leaned back, his eyes burning with shame and anger. Anger not at her, but at himself. At his weakness, his cowardice. He had spent years building empires, yet in the one place that truly mattered, he couldn't protect the woman who had given his son life again. He went to find her. She was in the kitchen, folding laundry, her sleeves rolled up, her movements steady despite the tension that thickened the air. When she looked up, she knew. She saw it in his eyes. "They've spoken to you," she said quietly. Daniel nodded. His throat felt dry. "They think it's best if you take some time away. Just until things calm down." Her hands froze mid-fold. The silence stretched, heavy and endless. Then she smiled, a small, sad curve of her lips that broke his heart. "I understand," she whispered. "No," he said, stepping closer. "You don't. This isn't what I want. I just—" "It's what you have to do," she finished for him. "For your son, for your name. I know." Her voice was soft, but it cut through him like a blade. She placed the folded clothes on the counter and wiped her hands on her apron. "May I at least say goodbye to Ethan before I go?" He couldn't answer. He only nodded, unable to meet her eyes. Upstairs, the nursery was bathed in late afternoon light. Isabella lifted Ethan from his crib, holding him close one last time. The baby gurgled, small hands clutching at her hair, his innocent smile unaware of the breaking happening around him. "My sweet boy," she whispered, tears trembling in her lashes. "Be good, all right? Don't forget that you're loved. Always." Daniel stood by the door, his heart twisting with every word. When she turned to face him, her eyes were full of everything she couldn't say. "Thank you," she murmured. "For what?" His voice was barely a whisper. "For letting me love him." Her words shattered what was left of his composure. He stepped forward as if to stop her, but she was already walking away. Down the stairs, past the walls that had witnessed both their healing and their undoing. At the front door, the sky opened, rain falling like grief from heaven. She stepped into it without hesitation, her figure small against the vast gray world. Daniel watched from the window as she disappeared beyond the iron gates. The rain blurred everything, the trees, the sky, his vision. All that remained was the echo of a choice that would haunt him for years. The choice to protect his image instead of his heart. That night, Ethan cried until his tiny voice grew hoarse. No one could calm him. Melissa tried, the new nurse tried, even Daniel himself tried. But the baby refused every bottle, every lullaby. The house that had once been filled with warmth now rang again with grief. Daniel sat in the dark, his son's cries bleeding through the walls, and whispered into the emptiness. "I'm sorry." But apologies couldn't cross the distance between what he had lost and what he had left behind. Outside, the storm raged long into the night. Inside, Daniel Carter, the man the world envied, realized that all his wealth, all his power, meant nothing when the one person who had brought light back into his life was gone. And as the rain kept falling, the house grew cold again, waiting for a dawn that no longer knew how to come. Rain followed her for days, as if the sky itself could not stop weeping for her. Isabella walked through the streets with a small bag clutched to her chest, her thin coat soaked through, her shoes ruined by the mud that swallowed each step. The city looked so different when you no longer had a home to return to. The golden lights that once seemed beautiful now burned with indifference. People passed her by umbrellas held high, coats buttoned, eyes fixed anywhere but on her. She had become invisible. Another shadow moving quietly through a world that had no space for the poor, the shamed, or the misunderstood. She found a cheap room at the edge of town, where the walls were thin and the ceiling leaked each time it rained. But it was still a roof, and for a few nights it was enough. She took small cleaning jobs when she could, scrubbing offices, washing floors, her hands raw from soap and cold water. Each night she returned to the small bed, closing her eyes and seeing Ethan's face, the way he had smiled in his sleep, the warmth of his little body pressed against her chest. Sometimes she would wake in the middle of the night with her arms aching, as if they remembered holding him. Weeks passed, and the work grew scarce. One by one, the people she cleaned for stopped calling. Word traveled fast in this city. The whispers had followed her even here, the maid who had crossed a line with her wealthy employer, the woman who had loved too much, too openly. Soon, no one wanted to hire her. Her money ran out quietly, like the last few drops in a cup that had already been emptied too many times. The landlord gave her 3 days to pay or leave. She begged for more time, but he only shrugged. "Rules are rules," he said, eyes already drifting to the next tenant waiting in the hallway. On her last night in the room, Isabella sat by the window, watching the rain fall in silver threads. Her heart was quiet, not empty, but heavy with something deeper than pain. She whispered a prayer she could barely finish. "Please, God, just let him be safe. Let him be loved." It was the only wish she had left. When dawn came, she packed her few belongings into a plastic bag and stepped out into the cold morning air. The city felt endless. She wandered until her feet bled, until the sun sank and the streets emptied. That night, she found a bench near a church where a kind old priest left bread for the homeless. She sat there, her body trembling with exhaustion, her clothes clinging to her skin. When she closed her eyes, she could still hear Ethan's laughter, faint and far away, like an echo of the life she once belonged to. On the second night, the wind turned cruel. She huddled under a broken awning near an abandoned shop, trying to sleep, but fear kept her awake. Near midnight, 3 men approached from the shadows. Their laughter was sharp, their eyes dark with hunger for something beyond food. "Pretty girl," one of them sneered. "Why sleep alone?" She didn't answer, only clutched her bag tighter. "We can give you a place," another whispered, stepping closer, "if you know how to be grateful." Her pulse thundered. She bolted, barefoot, into the rain. Her feet splashed through puddles, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She didn't stop running until she found the steps of a church and collapsed there, shivering beneath the stone arch. Somewhere in the distance, bells rang. She stayed until dawn, her tears blending with the rain. On the third morning, she met an old man sitting beside a trash bin behind the church, wrapped in layers of tattered coats. He had kind eyes and a voice like gravel softened by years of kindness. "First time on the streets, isn't it?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then nodded. He smiled faintly. "You can always tell. The new ones still look up when it rains. The rest of us stopped looking a long time ago." His name was Mr. Howard. He had been homeless for more than a decade, living beneath a bridge with others who had nowhere else to go. "You're welcome to join us," he said. "It's not much, but you'll be safer there." Under the bridge, Isabella met them 5 souls, weathered by life's cruelty but not entirely stripped of humanity. There was Mrs. Mercedes, who had lost her home after her son stole everything for drugs. Jack, a man who once built houses but now slept under one made of cardboard. And 2 quiet boys who had run from places they never spoke about. They made a small fire out of scraps of wood, their laughter tired but real. For the first time in weeks, Isabella felt a flicker of belonging, a fragile kind of family. "There's one rule here," Mr. Howard said that night as they sat by the fire. "You share when you can, and you protect one another. Most of all, don't lose your dignity. Even out here, that's something no one can take from you." She nodded, clutching her knees, the flames reflecting in her wet eyes. "I'll try," she whispered. The days blurred into one another. She learned where the baker left unsold bread at closing, where the kind nurse at the clinic would offer warm tea. Her body grew thinner, her face paler, but inside her, something fierce kept her moving, the memory of Ethan's heartbeat against her skin. At night, when the city quieted, she would look up at the stars, peeking through the cracks of the bridge, and whisper, "Are you sleeping, little one? Do you still remember me?" The wind always answered softly, like a lullaby. One evening, she woke from a fevered dream. Her breasts ached painfully, still full, still heavy. It had been months, yet her body refused to forget. She pressed a hand against her chest and sobbed silently. Her body remembered being needed, her soul remembered being loved. She whispered through tears, "I don't know why this hurts so much." But the truth was simple. Some kinds of love never end. They only change shape. Elsewhere, in a house too big for one man, Daniel Carter was living a different kind of torment. The first night after Isabella's departure, Ethan cried until dawn. Nothing comforted him. Not the music box, not the rocking cradle, not the arms of the women paid to soothe him. Daniel held him close, whispering broken words, but the child screamed until his voice gave out. When he finally fell asleep, Daniel sat beside the crib, his shirt damp with sweat and tears, his mind echoing with guilt. He told himself it was a phase, that Ethan would adjust. But deep down, he knew his son wasn't missing comfort. He was missing her. Isabella's scent, her warmth, her heartbeat. She had become the rhythm that guided his tiny soul, and Daniel had taken that away. Days turned into nights, and Ethan began refusing milk altogether. Doctors came and went, offering formulas, medicines, advice. Nothing worked. The baby's body grew thinner, his skin pale as ivory. One doctor looked at Daniel gravely and said, "This isn't just physical. Babies can die of heartbreak too." Those words lodged in Daniel's chest like a blade. Each time Ethan's cry echoed through the hall, he felt it cut deeper. He would pace for hours, whispering apologies his son couldn't understand. "I'm sorry, little one. I was wrong." Sleep abandoned him. In every quiet corner of the house, he saw traces of Isabella the rocking chair by the window, the faint scent of jasmine she used to wear, the folded blanket she had once laid over Ethan's feet. The mansion, once vibrant with life, now felt suffocating. By the second week, Daniel was no longer the polished man people admired. His suits went unpressed, his meetings unattended. When his assistant called to remind him about an investor dinner, he answered flatly, "Cancel everything." The empire he'd built now felt meaningless. What use was success when the only thing that truly mattered was slipping away in front of him? Each night, he sat by Ethan's crib, stroking the boy's tiny hand, whispering stories about his mother. "She would have loved you, you know. She had the same smile you do." But as the baby grew weaker, even those stories turned into prayers. Then, one night, when Ethan's cries fell into silence, Daniel panicked. He lifted the child, felt his shallow breath, and realized he could no longer keep pretending. His pride, his fear of the world's judgment, all of it had cost too much. He whispered into the dark, "I need to find her." Across the city, beneath the bridge, Isabella stirred awake from a fever dream, her body trembling, her heart aching with an unfamiliar urgency, as if somewhere, someone was calling her name through the night. She didn't know it yet, but love, once lost, was already finding its way back to her. And though the road between them was long, something invisible and tender connected their hearts again, the same bond that had once saved a dying child, the same light that had once made a broken woman believe in life again. The night sky held no stars that evening, but somewhere within that darkness, love was already moving quietly, stitching two wounded souls back toward each other, one prayer, one heartbeat, one act of courage at a time. The night Daniel made the decision to find her, the rain was relentless, a curtain of silver between him and the rest of the world. The streets blurred into streaks of wet glass as he drove through the city, windshield wipers beating like a desperate heart. Each red light felt like punishment, each turn a reminder of how long he had waited. In the back seat lay Ethan's blanket, the one Isabella used to wrap around the baby when she sang. Daniel gripped it tightly each time he stopped, pressing it to his face, trying to remember her scent. Jasmine and milk and something pure, something like forgiveness. He had already searched every place he could think of: her old boarding house, the employment agencies, even the hospital near the slums. Everywhere, the same answer: no one by that name works here. His desperation grew heavier by the hour. The city, with all its noise and light, felt endless and cruel. People hurried past him without glancing up, each one too busy to notice a man breaking apart quietly. By the third night, exhaustion blurred his vision. He sat in his car near the edge of downtown, the streets empty except for a few flickering lamps. His reflection in the window looked foreign, a man unshaven, eyes hollow, suit wrinkled. He whispered to himself, "You did this. You let her walk away." Then, softer, almost like a prayer, Please, God. Let me find her before it's too late. Across town, under the same rain, Isabella huddled beneath the bridge beside Mr. Howard. Her breathing was shallow, her skin pale. The fever that had lingered for days now burned through her veins. You need to see a doctor, Howard murmured, laying his worn coat over her shoulders. She smiled weakly. I'll be fine, she whispered, though her voice trembled. It's just the cold. But it wasn't. The nights on the street had taken their toll. Her body had grown frail, her spirit tired. And yet, in her half-conscious dreams, she kept seeing the same image, a baby crying, reaching for her, his small fingers curling toward the light. She would wake with tears on her cheeks, whispering his name into the dark. Ethan. That name carried through the night like a thread of longing, invisible but unbroken. And somewhere, miles away, Daniel felt it. He was standing in the hospital corridor, staring at his son through the glass. Ethan's small body looked lost among the white sheets, his breaths shallow, his little hands limp. The doctor's words still echoed in Daniel's mind. He's weakening. If he doesn't respond soon, we may lose him. Daniel pressed his palms against the glass, his voice cracking. He's waiting for her, he said. He won't live without her. When he got the call the next day, it felt like a miracle disguised as coincidence. Mr. Carter? The voice on the other end said, hesitant. I think I saw the woman you're looking for. Dark hair, thin, looked sick. She was near Avenida Caracas, walking by the bridge. Daniel didn't wait to hear more. He was already out the door before the call ended. The city blurred past again, but this time his heart was pounding with a different kind of fear, the fear of being too late. When he reached the bridge, night had fallen again. The smell of damp earth filled the air, mixed with the faint scent of smoke from nearby fires. Shadows huddled under the concrete archway, people sleeping, people surviving. Daniel stepped carefully, his shoes sinking into mud. Excuse me, he called softly, his voice trembling. I'm looking for someone. A woman named Isabella. No one answered at first. Then a rough voice came from the dark. Who's asking? He turned and saw an old man, Mr. Howard, watching him cautiously from his corner. My name is Daniel Carter, he said, his voice breaking. I'm looking for Isabella Torres. Please. She saved my son's life. Howard studied him for a long time. Then he sighed. You're the one, he said quietly. The man who sent her away. Daniel's throat closed. He couldn't deny it. Yes, he whispered. But I came to make it right. My son is dying. She's the only one who can reach him. Howard's eyes softened. He pointed toward a shadowed corner. She's over there. Daniel turned and saw her, curled up against the wall, covered in a thin, torn blanket, her body trembling with every breath. For a moment, the world stopped. He had imagined this moment countless times, rehearsed the words he'd say if he ever saw her again, but now none of them came. He knelt beside her, his hands shaking. Isabella. His voice cracked. Her eyelids fluttered open, unfocused at first. Then recognition dawned. She flinched, her body instinctively pulling away. What are you doing here? She rasped, her voice hoarse from cold. He reached out but stopped short of touching her. Please, listen to me. Ethan, he's in the hospital. He's very sick. The doctors can't help him. He needs you. A bitter laugh escaped her, small and broken. He needed me before. You didn't. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. You're right, I was a coward. I let fear and pride destroy everything good that came into my life. But please, don't let my mistakes take him too. She looked away, her breathing uneven. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the sound of the rain filled the space between them. Then, slowly, she whispered, Why should I believe you? He knelt lower, his voice barely a whisper. Because I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm begging for a chance to save our son. Her heart stuttered. Our son. The words lingered in the air, soft and trembling. For the first time in months, she saw truth in his eyes, raw, unguarded, stripped of pride. She looked down at her trembling hands, then at the faint light reflecting on the river below. "Fine," she whispered. "I'll go. But only for Ethan." He nodded, tears spilling freely now. "That's all I ask." He helped her to her feet carefully, afraid she might crumble if he let go. She was lighter than he remembered, her body frail beneath the oversized coat. As they walked to the car, she leaned slightly against him, too weak to pretend she didn't need support. He opened the door, helped her inside, and for the first time in months, she sat in warmth again. The heater hummed softly as they drove. Neither spoke. The silence was heavy, but not empty. It was full of everything they could not yet say. When they reached the hospital, the nurses looked up in shock. Daniel rushed ahead, guiding her into the ward. Ethan lay there, his tiny body hooked to tubes, his breath shallow. Isabella's steps faltered, tears spilling instantly. "Oh, my baby," she whispered, crossing the room. The moment her voice reached him, Ethan stirred. His small head turned, his lips quivered, and then his eyes opened weak but aware. He recognized her. Daniel covered his mouth, his breath breaking into sobs. Isabella gathered Ethan into her arms carefully, pressing him close to her chest. "It's all right," she whispered, her voice trembling with love. "Mama's here." The baby's cries softened into tiny sighs, his breathing steadier, his body relaxing against her warmth. The doctors stood frozen, stunned. One of them murmured, "It's like a miracle." Daniel couldn't move. His heart swelled and broke all at once as he watched them. Isabella bent her head, pressing her lips to Ethan's forehead, tears falling silently. Her arms cradled him with all the love she'd carried through her pain. In that moment, the room no longer felt like a hospital, it felt like grace itself. For hours, she stayed by his side, humming softly, feeding him gently as life returned to his small frame. Daniel sat nearby, afraid that if he blinked, the image might vanish. When she finally looked up, their eyes met. There were no words, only the quiet acknowledgement of everything that had been lost and everything that had been found again. That night, Daniel signed papers for the hospital to clear her as Ethan's caretaker. The staff watched in silence as he guided her to a private room, offering her clean clothes, food, a warm bed. She refused at first. "I didn't come back for comfort," she said softly. "I know," he replied, "but I can't let you suffer again, not after everything you've done." His voice carried something new, gentleness, reverence. For the first time, Isabella didn't hear pity. She heard love, quiet and steady, like the sound of healing. As the hours passed, Ethan slept peacefully, his small hand resting on hers. Daniel sat by the window, looking at them both, and whispered into the dim light, "You brought him back to life. You brought me back too." The world outside was still dark, but inside that room there was warmth, the kind born of forgiveness, of love rediscovered through pain. And for the first time since Claire's death, Daniel prayed not for success, not for strength, but for the courage to keep the light that had finally returned to his life. He didn't know what the next day would bring, but as dawn began to break, he looked at Isabella's sleeping face, at the baby nestled safely in her arms, and realized that the past no longer had power over him. For the first time, there was only this three souls who had found each other again through loss, pain, and the quiet miracle of love that refused to die. Morning arrived like a whispered promise, soft light filtering through the hospital blinds. The world outside still carried the gray chill of rain, but in Ethan's room, there was warmth, the kind that came not from heaters or blankets, but from hearts that had found each other again. Isabella sat beside the bed, brushing a curl of hair from Ethan's tiny forehead. His breathing was calm now, his color returning, and for the first time in weeks there was peace in his small, sleeping face. Daniel watched from the doorway, his heart aching with something too vast to name. For months, he had moved through life like a ghost. But this scene, the gentle woman, the child who had finally stopped crying, the quiet stillness that wrapped around them made him feel human again. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, afraid that if he made a sound, it would all disappear. When Isabella finally looked up, their eyes met. She gave a small, tired smile, the kind that carried both forgiveness and distance. Daniel stepped closer. "He's healing," he said quietly, as though afraid to disturb the air. "He's strong," she replied, her fingers stroking Ethan's hand. "He just needed to remember love." Those words hit him deeply. He nodded, his throat tight. "And I needed to remember it too." For the next few days, the hospital became their small, fragile world. Daniel spent every waking moment there, refusing to leave Ethan's side. He brought Isabella food, blankets, and anything she needed, though she often said softly, "I only need him to be well." Still, he stayed, not out of duty, but out of something purer, something that had been growing inside him ever since he found her beneath that bridge. The doctors called Ethan's recovery miraculous. Each day he grew stronger, his laughter returning, filling the sterile room with life. Nurses stopped by just to smile at him. One evening, when Isabella held him close, humming softly, even strangers passing by paused to listen. Her voice carried warmth that made the air itself gentler. Daniel often caught himself just watching her, lost in quiet awe. She didn't know it, but in those moments he fell in love all over again. Not the way he once loved Claire, with youthful certainty, but with a depth that came only from breaking and healing, from losing everything and finding grace again. But guilt still shadowed his heart. One afternoon, when Ethan was asleep, Daniel asked her to meet him in the hospital garden. The sky was overcast, the air cool, and the scent of wet earth filled the space between them. "I need to tell you something," he began, his voice heavy. "I don't expect forgiveness, but you deserve to know how sorry I am. For everything. For believing lies, for sending you away, for letting you suffer when you were the only light left in this house." Isabella looked down at her hands. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her voice was calm. "I've already forgiven you." He blinked, startled. "Why?" "Because hate would have destroyed me," she said softly. "And I've been broken enough. Forgiving you doesn't mean forgetting. It just means I want to live again." Daniel's breath caught. "You deserve more than forgiveness, Isabella. You deserve a home, safety, peace. You deserve happiness." She smiled faintly. "Those are just words, Daniel. Happiness isn't given, it's built. And I'm still learning how." He took a step closer. "Then let me help you build it." The wind brushed between them, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from the hospital's garden wall. Isabella looked up, her eyes glistening. "You're asking for something I'm not sure I can give." "I'm not asking for love," he said quietly. "I'm asking for a chance to make right what I broke." Her gaze softened, and for a brief moment her defenses fell. She saw not the man who had hurt her, but the one who was trying, clumsily but sincerely, to atone. "Then start with Ethan," she whispered. "Be the father he needs. The rest will follow." He nodded, though a part of him longed for more, for her laughter in his home again, her voice in the hallways, her warmth by his side. But he knew healing took time. Love, built from wounds, had to grow carefully, or it would shatter again. Days turned into weeks. Ethan was discharged from the hospital, his health fully restored. The day they brought him home, the mansion didn't feel like the same place. The cold grandeur that once suffocated it now seemed gentler. Isabella hesitated at the door, unsure if she belonged there anymore. But Daniel was waiting, holding Ethan in his arms, his expression soft. "Welcome home," he said simply. It wasn't an order or an invitation. It was a plea. She looked around the tall ceilings, the polished floors, the echoes of old pain, and, for the first time, the house didn't feel hostile. It felt like something new, fragile but full of promise. Daniel led her to a room on the second floor. "You'll stay here," he said. "Not as staff. This is your space." She opened her mouth to protest, but he raised a hand. "Please, let me do this right." That night, Ethan slept soundly in his crib. Daniel and Isabella sat in the living room, the fire flickering between them. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was the silence of understanding, of two souls too tired for pretense. Finally, Daniel broke it. "Do you ever think God gives second chances?" Isabella smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "I think he gives as many as it takes until we finally listen." Her words settled deep in his heart. He leaned back, watching her as she stared into the flames. There was peace in her posture now, the kind that comes after storms. He realized that she wasn't just the woman who had saved his child, she was the reminder that love, even broken, could still rebuild the ruins of a life. Weeks passed, and the three of them settled into a quiet rhythm. Daniel began working from home more often, taking breaks to feed Ethan, to play with him, to learn the small rituals of fatherhood that Isabella had once done alone. Every time he heard his son laugh, every time Isabella's soft voice filled the house, the ache inside him loosened a little more. Yet sometimes, in the quiet of night, he would pass her room and pause outside the door, hearing the faint hum of a lullaby. It wasn't the song she had sung before, it was slower, older, filled with something unspoken. He would close his eyes, leaning his head against the wall, and whisper to himself, "If only I could turn back time." But he didn't need to. Slowly, gently, time itself was rewriting their story. One weekend, Daniel suggested they go to the park. The same park where Isabella had once wandered alone, cold and hungry. But now, when she stepped onto the green grass, it was with Ethan in her arms and sunlight spilling through the trees. They sat beneath a large oak, the air sweet with spring. Ethan giggled as he chased butterflies, his tiny hands reaching for light. Daniel watched them, his heart full. "You've changed everything," he said quietly. Isabella turned, smiling softly. "No, we just stopped running from what hurt us." He nodded. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," she said. "But love doesn't have to be easy to be real." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. She blinked, startled. Inside, a simple ring shimmered in the sunlight. "Daniel?" He looked at her, his eyes steady but tender. "I don't expect you to say yes today or tomorrow, but I want you to know this isn't out of guilt. It's because I love you, because you've taught me that love isn't about perfection. It's about grace, about showing up even after we've failed." Tears welled in her eyes. She closed the box gently and held it between her palms. "You've already given me enough," she whispered. "You gave me a reason to believe again." He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining as Ethan's laughter echoed nearby. The wind moved softly through the trees, carrying the scent of new beginnings. Neither spoke again. There was no need. The silence between them now was full, not of pain, but of peace. That night, as they returned home, Isabella tucked Ethan into bed and lingered by his crib, watching him sleep. Daniel stood behind her, his hand brushing hers. "You gave him life twice," he said softly. "And maybe me too." She turned, her eyes meeting his. "We all save each other in different ways," she whispered. Outside, the moon hung bright and full, washing the world in gentle light. Inside, three hearts beat in quiet harmony, carrying the promise of everything still ahead. The promise that love, no matter how broken it begins, can always find its way back to light. And though neither of them said it aloud, they both knew the truth. This was not an ending, but a beginning written by hands greater than their own. One born not from perfection, but from forgiveness, healing, and the soft, unspoken language of love rediscovered. The years that followed moved gently, like pages turning in a book written by grace. The mansion that had once echoed with loneliness now bloomed with laughter and life. Morning sunlight spilled through the wide windows, landing softly on toys scattered across the floor. The air was filled with the warm hum of quiet happiness, the sound of a home healed from grief. Ethan grew fast. He was no longer the fragile child who had once clung to life by a thread, but a bright-eyed boy who ran through the hallways with his father's curiosity and Isabella's tenderness. Every corner of that house carried the memory of what had once been lost, and what had been found again: forgiveness, family, and the kind of love that doesn't ask for perfection, only presence. Isabella often found herself standing by the same window where it had all begun, watching the world with a peace she had never known before. Sometimes she still felt the ghosts of old pain, the cold streets, the whispers, the ache of emptiness, but they no longer haunted her. They had become reminders of how far she'd come. Every scar was a thread in the tapestry of her strength. Every wound had turned into light. Daniel changed too. The man who had once hidden behind power and work had learned to slow down, to hold his son a little longer, to say thank you more often, to listen when words weren't needed. In his eyes now lived humility, the quiet kind that comes from having lost everything and realizing that love is the only thing that truly endures. In the evenings, when the day softened into gold and lavender, the three of them would sit in the garden. Ethan would chase butterflies among the flowers, while Isabella read aloud from one of her old storybooks. Daniel would sit beside her, not reading, not talking, just listening, the sound of her voice a gentle kind of music that healed the ache he no longer carried. One spring evening, the sky stretched wide and painted itself in hues of rose and amber. Daniel watched Isabella as she braided Ethan's hair, the last light of the sun catching on her face. It had been years since the day he found her beneath that bridge, years since he had begged for forgiveness, but even now, there were moments when he looked at her and felt the same awe, the same gratitude that had struck him that night. He reached for her hand. "You know," he said softly, "there's still a part of me that wakes up some mornings afraid it was all just a dream." Isabella smiled, her voice warm as sunlight. "Then I suppose love made the dream real." Her words lingered in the air like prayer. Ethan laughed nearby, the sound pure, untainted, like the echo of a miracle reborn. Daniel wrapped his arm around Isabella, and for the first time he felt no distance between what he wanted and what he had. Everything that mattered was right here: love reclaimed, life renewed. Later that night, after Ethan was asleep, they sat together by the window, gazing at the stars. The house was quiet, the world outside still. Daniel spoke first, his tone thoughtful, almost reverent. "Do you ever wonder why life broke us so completely before it brought us here?" Isabella's hand rested over his. "Because sometimes the only way to build something lasting," she said softly, "is to let the old walls fall first. Pain isn't punishment, Daniel. Sometimes it's preparation." He nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. "And you were my preparation for grace." She smiled faintly, tears welling. "And you were my reminder that love doesn't die, it just waits until we're ready to believe again." They didn't speak after that. They didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was full of love, forgiveness, the quiet rhythm of two hearts that had learned to beat in harmony. The next morning, Daniel woke early to the scent of fresh bread and the soft sound of Isabella's humming in the kitchen. It was a song he had never heard before, yet it felt familiar, the melody of peace. He paused at the doorway, watching her move with gentle ease, her hair catching the morning light. For a moment, he thought about how close he had come to losing this, how blind pride had nearly cost him a lifetime of warmth. Gratitude swelled in his chest like something holy. He walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned into him instinctively, smiling without turning around. "You're up early," she murmured. "I didn't want to miss this," he said softly. "This life, this moment. You." She turned, meeting his gaze, her eyes glowing with quiet affection. "You can't miss what's already yours." That day, they took Ethan to the park again, the same park where Daniel had once proposed. The trees were taller now, the grass greener, but the feeling was the same, that unspoken peace that fills the air when hearts finally come home. As the sun dipped low, painting everything in soft gold, Ethan ran toward them, his laughter echoing through the breeze. Daniel lifted him into his arms, spinning him gently, and Isabella laughed that sound of pure, unguarded joy. It was a simple day, but it felt eternal, the kind of memory that doesn't fade, even when years pass. That night, as the stars appeared again, Daniel tucked Ethan in and whispered, "You were the reason we found our way back." The child stirred, his tiny hand curling around Daniel's finger, and in that moment, every prayer Daniel had ever whispered was answered without a word. Later, as the house fell into quiet, Isabella sat on the porch, her head resting against Daniel's shoulder. Fireflies drifted through the darkness like tiny lanterns of hope. She closed her eyes and breathed in the stillness, the smell of jasmine, the soft hum of life unfolding just as it should. "This world can be cruel," she whispered, "but sometimes it still gives us back what we thought was gone forever." Daniel pressed a kiss to her forehead. Maybe that's what love really is, not something we find, but something that finds us again when we've learned how to see. She smiled, her voice barely a breath. "Then I hope everyone gets found, someday." The moon hung quietly above them, casting light over the garden that had seen so much sorrow, now filled with peace. The air itself seemed to hum with gratitude, as if even the stars were whispering thanks for the second chances love had written into their lives. If you followed this story and felt even a small spark of warmth in your heart, hold on to it. Let it remind you that even in the darkest hours, love never truly leaves, it just waits for you to open the door again. And if this story brought a little light to your soul, take a moment to share that light. Leave a thought below, something from your heart. Maybe someone out there needs your words more than you know. If it made you believe, even for a moment, that love can heal what time once broke, I invite you to stay with me here, in this little corner of peace and storytelling. Like, comment, and subscribe if you wish, not for numbers but to keep spreading warmth where the world sometimes forgets it. May your nights be gentle, your days be kind, and may you always find your way back to love, no matter how far you've wandered. Thank you for being here, truly.